Well folks, now that we got the Onan back together, I can finally bring the four-wheel drive down and start in on the build process. So for those of you who don't know about this, I built this tractor back in 2014. There should be some build videos back in the channel. I think there's a playlist, but I'm not sure. It was built out of two 400 series Gravely rear ends, an engine from a John Deere 216, if I'm not mistaken, that was rebuilt. Has a Simplicity Sunstrand power steering valve for the steering, a Fisher Speedcast plow pump for the hydraulic system, wheel horse parts for the hood and the dash, and then just a bunch of other miscellaneous stuff on it too. But when I first built it, I originally wanted to get the CCKA for it, but I could never find one at the time, and I figured, well, this is as good a time as any to put one onto it. So I figured I'd give you guys just one more view of it in its current state, because obviously enough, everything's going to be changing. It's going to be getting a different hydraulic system on it. The battery's probably going to have to get moved. It's going to need a hydraulic reservoir. More than likely the skid plate in the hood is going to have to change also. I'm also going to be building a 3-point hitch for it, or a sleeve hitch, depending on what I have for time between now and plow day, which is coming up pretty darn fast. I think we just got about a month away, and this is going to be done preferably a week beforehand, but we'll see. So anyways, I haven't started this thing for about a month or two at least. It's been sitting up here. So I'll set you guys down and I'll see if we can fire it up. And the four-wheel drive is finally up on the lift table. This is actually the first time I've ever had it up here, because when I built this tractor, I did it on the ground in here, which really wasn't all that easy to do. So I ended up rounding up some parts. This is the hydraulic pump that I'm going to be using. This came off of the 62 K20 Chevy truck that I had here, I think 2 years ago now, that I disassembled, the really crispy one. It was on a Western plow setup. Should still be a good pump. And I also have a hydraulic valve and lines from a Wheelhorse C125 that we put a loader on, and we pulled the hydraulics out of it. I think I have the piston for it around here somewhere. If not, I think I have a couple other hydraulic pistons up in the shed that we can use for the 3-point hitch. I also have the reservoir that came off of this pump setup too. It's a plastic tank, probably 2 quarts or so, and we're going to see if we can incorporate that into the system. So the first things first is, before I start tearing into the tractor, I am going to cut the gasket for the back of this adapter plate on the engine. That way I can mount the adapter plate and mount the gear and get this ready to just bolt right up into the transmission. After that, I have to peel off the hood, possibly the skid plate, fuel system, the battery, and all that good stuff. That way I can get this engine ready to pull out. So, let's get to it. I have the front transmission draining down right now. The 400 series riders and the commercial walk-behinds, the transmissions were more full than the L&C models. That way they could keep the high-low planetary range up against the engine, and a constant bath of oil keeps them from wearing out prematurely. So I also have the hydraulic pump pulled off of this side. I just flopped it over onto the tire, and the stuff that came out of that was pretty nasty too. It was ATF, but as you can see, it got a lot of water in it over the years, so it's starting to get to that milkshake color now. So the whole system's going to have to get flushed out, but it's going to end up getting redone anyway, so that's not too big of a deal. I have all my electrical pulled off, my hood's off of there, fuel line, choke, throttle, all that good stuff over here. I am going to leave the oil, not the oil pan, the skid plate on for now when I pull the engine off, just so I have something to rest it on. And then I'll probably see about going to get the engine hoist in here to shuffle this thing out, rather than try to heft it onto the ground, just because it'll be a little bit easier. Okay, I brought in the engine hoist, and I got that hooked up to the engine and the lift stud on the head. This is about as good as a view as you guys are going to get, because if I put you on the tripod, you're going to be too low to see anything. Figures the whole planetary set wants to come with it. Well, I guess it's coming with it. I know these were rebuilt when I put this engine on here back in 2014, and obviously enough, looks like they held up just fine for as much use as it gets. Well, there you have it. Engine's all off. So I put the planetary set back in and checked everything while it was out, and everything's still fairly tight because I had rebushed all the orbital gears here that go around the sun gear on the engine, and I put a new pilot bushing in this too in the back of the planetaries here when this was originally out. So everything looks good. The teeth aren't eaten up, nothing's wobbling around. real weird like, so it's all back in there, and I cleaned up the surface. So now I just have to get a gasket, the engine to adapter plate gasket here, to go onto the transmission, and then we could hook up that CCK and see about sliding that in here. Well, unfortunately, the skid plate's got to come off because this Onan sits a little bit lower, so I'll have to make a new skid plate for this engine when it goes on. Alright, let's try again. Slid that sucker right in. Sure as heck beats doing it, trying to balance over the tractor holding the engine up. Done that enough times, that's for sure. Engine's all bolted up, everything mounted up against the transmission real nice. So last night me and Dad were going over this, trying to figure out the hydraulics and electrical and the hood and dash and all that good stuff. So to start off with, I'm going to be remounting the original skid plate and the wheel horse hood onto this. And I found out to get this plate, the skid plate, to fit on this Onan, because the oil pan sits a little bit different, I have to cut the plate off of the pieces of square tubing and just move them out a little bit farther to widen it. Because as you can see, we just clear the starter solenoid on this side, and if it's all snugged up over there, I'll be sitting about right here on the oil pan, which is pretty much what I'm looking for. And it's only going to be about an inch difference from what it was on the Kohler, which isn't too bad, but it is still sitting pretty low. So we're going to get this pan out on the bench and we can start cutting the plate off to widen it apart. I got the plate cut off of the bars for the skid plate, and as you can see, I have the right arm on here. That's all bolted up to the axle. I had to move it out a little bit more towards the wheel, and it was able to clear the oil pan on the engine fairly well. So that side is okay. As for the left-hand side, though, I am going to have to notch this pipe to get it around the starter solenoid and notch it far enough back so that way I can get the wires and the cables onto the starter solenoid also. So I have to do that and then figure out a way to brace it, because I'm going to be getting rid of a lot of the integrity on the pipe. But that should be okay. And then when I put the plate on, I am going to have to drop it down a little bit, because you can see those little nubs on the bottom of the oil pan stick down a little bit, which isn't too big of a deal. But first things first, we're going to get this thing notched out. That way I can bolt it up to the housing, move it into the engine, and see where everything sits. Bar for the skid plate is all notched out. It went fairly well. I didn't have to take out as much as I thought I did either, and it still maintained a pretty fair amount of integrity in the bar. I think this is just under 1/8 inch square tubing, and I have half of it left down below here, so it doesn't have much of anything for flex in it. So as for the skid plate down the bottom, I just got finished cutting a bunch of little spacer blocks like so to space the plate down, because as you can see, it has to come down 5/8 to be able to clear the little bumps on the back of the oil pan along with the starter bracket down here. So I'm going to end up running those blocks down the edge of the skid plate. I'm going to tack those on there like so, and then I'll be able to weld these to the bars, and I'll have plenty of clearance underneath on the skid plate to clear all the bumps on the bottom of the oil pan and the starter bracket. All the little spacer blocks are all welded onto the plate. Everything seemed to go real nice, so I have them all spaced 3 inches apart. And I slid it up under here, and everything mounts up really well. I got plenty of room left between everything on the bottom of the engine. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull these bars off of here, and I can get everything jigged up so I can be ready to weld on the plate. Well, I got the skid plate and everything, just a dry fit here. I had tacked the plate to the bars. Everything's squared up about as good as it's gonna get. And now that the plate has moved with these blocks in it, I also have to move up my hood hinge. So I had rested that on there, and I have it sitting as level as I can get it. And what I did is I had some gussets in the drawer that I cut the ends off of and just squared up a little bit. And I fit those in there like so and put some holes in them. So that's going to be the new spot for the hood pivot. And I'll just weld those right on top of the old brackets. And then I just have to weld on my little tabs for the stops for when it opens, and I'll be all set. So we can take this off of here, finish getting it welded up, and then we can finally mount it. And there you have it, folks. The skid plate's all set and ready to go. Everything welded up pretty nice for the most part. All the blocks inside there, and I got the hood pivots all squared away. The only thing I have to do is weld the stops onto them, but I'm not going to do that until I can roll the tractor outside and raise the hood up and make sure it stops at the right spot. I also got a hole cut in it, which is not too proud of it, but someday I'm going to end up getting a set of hole saws that'll do metal. But for the time being, I just flame cut it and hit it with the burr, so that way everything's all cleaned up. So it came up fairly decent, a little bit easier than I figured it was going to be to fab up. I figured I'd have to make a whole new one. But anyways, we'll slide this thing underneath and get it all bolted up. Last night I ended up getting the skid plate and everything mounted up. Everything went together really well. As you can see, I have plenty of clearance around my starter solenoid now, and plenty of room left over for my wires. The hole for the oil drain also worked out pretty well too. The elbow sits nice and flush, so nothing catches underneath. So if I drive over anything, I won't hurt anything on the oil pan and catch the elbow. I was hoping to get a little bit more footage of the build process of this in terms of the welding and cutting and what I did to modify it. But it was Monday yesterday, and I worked on this thing all day, and it ended up cutting into my shop repair time. So I was more concerned about just getting everything done. That way I can get back to my regularly scheduled work here. So towards the end of this week and weekend, I'm going to be starting in on the hydraulic system. I'm going to be mounting the hydraulic pump on the side of the engine over here, and that'll be driven off of the flywheel. And we can also start figuring out lines that are going to be running back to the hydraulic reservoir, and from further back there to the 3-point hitch lift. So that's what's to come in part 5. So anyways, folks, until then, there you have it.